Okay, so another question relates to the use of AI and Gen AI. So the question here is what can it be used for? We discussed briefly about it. I mentioned also LLMs for that explainability. Andreas, do you see any concrete things for that, for current LLMs, or perhaps other approaches, other research that's going on that can help there? I mean, we in our previous discussion before this webinar, we did speak about, okay, AI, how do you define it? But here, let's start with the LLM part. Very concretely, what do you think it could or could not solve now, and maybe in the future?
That's a good question. In some sense, it goes a little bit back to the question you asked previously, like when should you implement these things? And I think, AI is a huge buzzword, and some people think that, oh, you can, like, AI will solve everything, right? And that's simply not true for some very fundamental reason, because in the end, I'm talking about LLMs here, right? LLMs are predictive models, right, of what you train them on. And what is that? Well, essentially, let's say the human knowledge, like everything that's out on the internet in some sense, right? So it can produce solutions maybe for things that have already been solved before, but it will have a very hard time to be innovative in any way, right? And this is really where experts come in and will be able to make a change. And I think that's very important to keep in mind, right? That LLMs or AI in general is predictive, while optimization is about planning. And we should kind of keep these things a bit separate. Of course, there will be places where these things will interact, and I can see, again, like if you have a simple thing that you want to solve with optimization, I could see a tool that uses AI in order to produce some sort of simple model and does it, right? But the more complex it becomes, the harder this will be, and in the end, you will need an expert to really check that everything works as it should, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Clear on the LLMs. On the other research or any other parts where you have seen some improvements, or is that too difficult to see any concrete cases at this moment yet?
Research is of course always like it's basic research, right? So a lot of the things are being researched. Most of that will not see the light of day when it comes to industrial applications. And you cannot predict which parts that are, right? So some parts will, some parts don't. Most will not. But yeah, like I said in the beginning, right? In general, I guess what you can say is that more and more complex types of problems, we will have tools to solve them, right? That's kind of the general thing.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. There is another question relates. It's an interesting one. It's a bit of a possible guesswork. I have my own opinion about it, but I'm curious to each of yours opinion. The question relates to how much of the scheduling and planning problems in the world, how much of that is currently automated on the one hand, and how much of that is actually optimized through solvers. So the question relates to our solvers mainstream or not within supply chain planning and scheduling. So the question is really about giving a percentage of how much is, let's say fully solved with actual solvers. How much of the planning do you think is the case, each of you?
But my question is, why is this relevant? Because this is a thing we see. Well, let's use the most fancy tool. Do you need it? Sometimes you just need a heuristic. So,
Yes.
so why? And then you implement a solver. They immediately go back to Excel. Well, with a heuristic, which is also recommended. Don't jump from Excel to optimization. Maybe use a heuristic in between. But the heuristic should be custom made to the rules of that company. So then the planners, talking about the learning curve, know the correlation between input and output when they know the rules, because they wrote the rules, right? So then it's not important that all the companies in the world implement mathematical optimization. No, it's important that each company understands what are the possibilities out there, maybe do a proof of concept, do a heuristic, do an optimization using open source, and then you see what is best for you, because there is no one recipe for success.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I agree with that. And I think a lot, if you talk about just all companies in the world, whether it's e-commerce, wholesalers, whether it's manufacturers, many are just smaller companies also, not with such huge complexity. So if you talk about the number of companies, well, not all of them actually need those kinds of solutions. That being said, there are also those anywhere with the complexity that just haven't looked into it. So okay, let's not.
I have maybe
Yes,
an
okay.
answer to that real quick. I mean, I think the answer is very simple. It's essentially almost none. But the reason is that, you know, what does it mean to plan something? I mean, we all plan all the time, right? If I have my dishwasher and I put like my dishes in there, this is you can see it as a scheduling kind of problem. You put, I mean, it's an assignment problem essentially. And I mean, as human beings, we kind of just do it intuitively. We just pack it somehow, like, so that most of it fits in. You know, we use some sort of heuristic on some, you know, very basic level, let's say, right? And I mean, if you go into a company, then I mean, we plan all the time, like, do I go here first or there first? You know, I mean, in which sequence, in which order do I do my tasks? All these things are planning processes, right? And I mean, only the very, very few, like very complex things in the end even deserve an optimizer. I mean, in terms of an algorithm to do it, right? So in that sense, I think, yeah, it's essentially none.
Yes.
But if I can add to it, it's not just like that, because as I said already, sometimes companies in supply chain, they have two constraints, very simple, but they need the power, you know, because if you use an open source solver, it runs for 20 hours. If you use a commercial solver, it runs in half an hour. Even the constraints are very simple. So yeah, that's the problem in supply chain, that you are always fighting with the size, not the complexity. If you go outside supply chain, or let's say a few problems will become non-linear, or there is a little bit of combinatorial optimization, it's a bit different. But yeah, sometimes you cannot avoid the solver if you want to have, like we were talking, scenarios. You cannot wait for 20 hours to run through a scenario, then 20 hours for another one. So having fast, it's very important, and that's where most of the solver companies, I guess they invest both in this performance and then complexity. Because they are in supply chain, they are, the performance is the most important, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at most companies today, even if solvers or optimizers would give them benefit, I think that the complexity for most companies is not worthwhile of going that route. On top of that, you indeed have the skill gap. Many mid-sized, smaller companies, you still need to have your skills in-house to be able to keep running a solver, or you need to hire people externally to run them for you. And I think in many cases, there is not even a benefit, because you also need to understand your model very, very well to build all the constraints in such a way that it indeed gives a feasible solution that is workable.
Yes, it's a fair point. On another question, it again relates to the LLMs, but I do think I just want to come very briefly back on it, because actually it was some time ago that I saw a video of it. I don't recall which tool or who posted it, but the question relates to it. And it is, can you build the model, the equations, gather the constraints, let's say, in a way of just prompting it, getting full text in there from a user, from a planner? That's the one question. Second thing is, maybe anybody of you, have you seen that video or the tool that I speak about? It was like ChatGPT, for instance. You can just prompt it, but it creates equations. It was not ChatGPT, it was something specific for Cristina.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So all the companies have inventory, demand, the flow, what comes in, what goes out of the node. They were offering the clients an Excel where they were saying the structure. This is what you need to give us: demand, rates, BOM, and so on. And then with the press of the button, the model was generated, all the constraints. And it was 80% of any supply chain solver out there. And then an expert was needed, if still needed, to build on the top of that. So that was already 10 years ago. It was possible without AI. It's just a matter of doing it. And the other thing that you mentioned, yeah, I know the video, but we are not advertising now for companies, which is a bit what Andreas said about the explainability, in the sense that, well, let's say you have a vehicle routing problem, and what if the solver proposes go from Berlin to Hamburg, but a user should write, can we, it's not allowed to go from Berlin to Hamburg, it's only has to go through Paris.
Yep.
And then immediately now, so that the technology we have now, it changes the constraints and it shows the results, but still those constraints were written by a person, but the AI has the power to read in English, because you write in English, send from here to here, there, and then yeah, it's very easy to see the impact. But again, this works for smaller solvers where you have quick results, because if a solver runs for 1 hour or 2 hours, which is something which happened a lot in supply chain, maybe it's not very useful. So depends.
Yeah. Okay. I will pick you up though on which company that was afterwards. But that's fine. There's here a good question, and it relates again to this about gathering the right requirements, gathering those constraints. And so the question is, what's the best advice that you can give to pose the right questions to the company to gather those requirements and those constraints? There are probably many companies have templates for this. Suppose a company is trying to do this themselves without a partner who has done this for many times, then what are some key areas or any documentation out there that you would recommend that people can freely access? Any of you?
Yes, I have a lot of things to say. I don't know what to start with, because I'm actually prepared. I have a list of questions, right? And then when I go to a client, I have those 20 questions, and then I know what kind of solutions they need. And I also know which software can do those, like for example, lot size. Just a simple example. If your company is small and you have a lot size and you have it at product level and you also want it at product group level, a software can do it, but another one cannot do it. Or one can do it at product level, but if you want to, for example, group by flavor, right? So it's not by SKU. It's like a group of products, and you want lot size there, which is a fundamental thing of how you plan. Some softwares cannot do that. So you need to ask this, you know? So this kind of like very specific question, because all the users say, we want to have a view to put demand, like very general, very vague. You need to go into this almost shop floor constraints.
Just you were talking about that document that you have, not linking it specifically to software vendors, just getting the right requirements, gathering those from the users, from the people who are involved in the planning. Are there any other resources out there besides your document that you have that you would recommend to people? So that would be something, or if you want to share that, if that document will be somewhere
I will share it. It will go on the website. Yeah, of course. I'm working on it.
Person who asked that question, optimization for all, keep an eye on it. Okay, that's unless Johan, you have any other?
No, what I would like to add to that is one of the things that I've run into in the 30 years that I'm doing this kind of project is that I always I'm mapping out the real supply chain, and it depends, of course, what you try to optimize, but by mapping out the supply chain, by understanding what are your real constraints and what are your imaginary constraints, because some constraints are not constraints, and you need to understand what are the things that are really constraining my plan, and those you need to plan for. By making a good understanding of why you need to plan a certain factory in a certain way, you can understand what your true constraints are. And in many cases, even very complex supply chains where you have a big assembly plants, there was something about metros and buses in the line. You can chop them up in smaller parts and building with that kind of stuff. But understanding how the physical supply chain really operates, what are the real constraints that you try to plan with, and model those, I think that is it. That's, I think, the key to it. Then you do need to have people that are capable of mapping out that supply chain, making a model out of it, because you need to keep asking the right questions to indeed come up with a model.
Yes, and I can add to that that you should also try to see your how do you say, all the planning levels and the IT landscape, because you have strategic, tactical, operational, and then you want the decisions that are taken in the strategic horizon to travel to the shop floor. But because of the tools you have in between, the decisions are lost, they are not executed very well. So it's very important for us to understand what is your decision model as a company. How, if you take a strategic, it doesn't matter if you do it on Excel or not, how does it translate to the shop floor? And then when you understand that, you can also choose the right tool, because the role of the tool is to support the planning processes, not to fix. Because sometimes companies say, oh, we don't know what we are doing with the planning. We'll do some mathematical optimization and it will tell us what to do. No, the tool is there to support, but you need to have clear who does what and when, and how decision travels through your planning level. So
Yes.
that's the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So there are still some unanswered questions there. Chat, I see. We can't cover them all, unfortunately. So maybe as a final point from each of you, do you still have any? I'm not going to ask you to do a recap of the key parts, because we have talking about many different things and you don't have to repeat that, but perhaps some final resources that you want to share, because some questions are still related to that. You have like 2 or 3, can be paper, it can be case studies from industry, it can be specific tools, Cristina, that you would recommend people to look at, to learn from. I already mentioned optimization for all, and so let's look at some other ones also. What are some good ones? I will do the same from my end also.
Okay, but I can also start. What it's also included on the website is that I initiated a hands-on supply chain optimization masterclass where I exactly do this, open the black box. And that's not for technical people necessarily, but of course it's very helpful, is to understand how are the equations, how do you think of it, what is the logic in supply chain, and how does it translate into the equation. And the equations are linear, so they're easy to understand for everybody. So if you want to understand a bit this business to technical, you can have a look
at the
there.
masterclass. Okay, yes. Good. Thank you. Johan, you have any specific things? Maybe one that you want to close to?
No, to be the one thought that I have is indeed don't try to optimize your complete supply chain in one go. Try to optimize the ones where you can earn the most money.
Yeah.
And what gives you the biggest headache, and start working on that. And and start simple.
Yes. Okay. Very clear. Thank you. Andreas, any final things you want to share?
Yeah, I don't know, in terms of resources, I mean, I'll just say, yeah, optimization for all, just go there. We have a lot of resources there to look at for sure. You know, books, videos, podcasts, a lot of things.
Yes.
Definitely a place to start.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. So with that, thank you to the 3 of you. Thank you, Cristina, Johan, Andreas, for sharing your experience, your insights. Thank you to the audience for the discussion in the chat. It was engaging to follow. Also, thank you for the questions. If you still have any other questions, well, you know where to find these 3 people. You know where to find me. Somewhere in July, I'll also be hosting another webinar that will be with 2 planning people, planning managers. They will share their tools, habits, just to get their work done. So again, something educational from people in the space itself. Don't have a link yet. I see some links being dropped in here from optimization for all as well. So we'll also share the recording afterwards so that you can look up some of these names. With that, I wish you all still a good day or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.